The rain is falling softly. The room is still. And tonight, I'm here with you again. If you enjoy these quiet nights together, subscribe so I can read to you again tomorrow. By the way, what time is it where you are right now? I always wonder who else is awake with me at this hour. There's a kind of silence that only lived in the 80s at least. That's how I remember it, not the silence we have now, which is filled with the low hum of fridges, background apps, and the distant thrum of traffic at all hours. No, this was a softer kind of quiet. It came after the music stopped playing on a cassette, just before the tape clicked over, or in the early morning, when you were the first one up, sitting at the kitchen table in your socks, listening to the faint hiss of the radiator and the occasional creak from the apartment upstairs. I think about that kind of quiet more often than I'd admit. Maybe it's because the world feels louder now, not just in sound, but in pace, in expectation. Back then, everything seemed to move a little slower, like it was okay not to know what came next. I remember the sounds of my childhood with more clarity than the faces. The clack-clack of the VCR when you pushed the tape in. The click of the little TV dial as you turned through 5 or 6 channels, each one fuzzier than the last. And that low, warbly tone a radio made when it was just slightly off station like it was breathing. My father used to wake up early and sit in the living room in his undershirt, drinking instant coffee and tapping his spoon against the ceramic cup. He had a rhythm to it, not fast, just steady. I could hear it from my room, and I'd know. It's safe to get up now. The day has started. The kettle would whistle shortly after, and then came the shuffle of slippers across linoleum, my mother humming tunelessly as she made toast. We didn't have much, but the house had its own soundscape, a kind of music made from small routines. I used to sit on the floor with my legs crossed, right in front of the TV, waiting for cartoons to begin. There was always that high-pitched buzz when you turned the set on, and it took a few minutes for the picture to settle, always a little greenish, like the show came from another planet. And when you hit pause on the VHS remote, one of those chunky gray ones with big rubber buttons, the movie would freeze into a blur, faces distorted, like time didn't know what to do with itself. I think we all lived in that blur a little more back then. I don't mean we were lost, just softer around the edges. The world wasn't yet in high definition. People didn't speak in tweets. We paused more, listened more, waited. I was reminded of all this the other day when I heard a sound I hadn't heard in years, the slow clack of a cassette case being opened. A kid on the tram had an old Walkman, silver and scuffed, and I swear for a moment my whole body remembered what it felt like to rewind something with a pencil. That's what sounds can do. They don't just echo, they transport, bring you back to kitchens that no longer exist. Rooms painted colors that are long since gone. A time when even silence had texture. I miss that. Not in a bitter way, just in the way you miss an old coat, not because it was fancy, but because it fit you well and it carried your shape. Our street in the 80s had its own voice. You'd wake up to the sound of a milk truck rattling down the road, the glass bottles clinking against each other like a lazy wind chime. Sometimes, on summer mornings, the neighbor's radio would drift through the open windows, a voice from some distant station announcing the weather, mixed with static, like the air itself was still waking up. We didn't have the constant noise of notifications or engines revving every few minutes. The loudest sound I remember was kids playing outside, their laughter and shouts bouncing off the narrow brick walls. There's something about that sound, the echo of children's voices on a sleepy street, that feels like a promise that the world is still simple somewhere, even if only for an hour. We had a dog back then, a mutt named Bruno. His nails made a tapping rhythm on the wooden floor that I can still hear if I close my eyes. He'd bark exactly twice when the postman arrived. Never more, never less, as if he had some private agreement with him. My mother's sewing machine added its own melody to the house, a steady whir that rose and fell, broken up by the sharp clack of her scissors. Sometimes I'd sit beside her just to hear it, even if I didn't care about what she was making. These were the sounds that told me life was happening, even when nothing big was going on. In the evenings, the street would change tone. You'd hear screen doors slam softly as neighbors stepped out to talk, the distant thud of a basketball hitting pavement, the faint hum of a TV through a thin wall. My father's car would pull in late, its engine growling low, then coughing to a stop, followed by his slow footsteps and the squeak of the front gate. I didn't realize how comforting these sounds were until they stopped. Until years later, when everything became quiet in a different way, not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of everyone having moved on or moved away. These days, the streets outside my windows sound different. Cars pass faster. Conversations are shorter. Even the laughter feels less like a melody and more like a fragment. Maybe I'm just older. But I can't help thinking we've traded a lot of warmth for speed. Sometimes I wonder if the silence of my apartment now is too sharp, too clean. It doesn't creak. It doesn't hum. It just waits. And that's why, late at night, I'll put on an old cassette tape I found at a flea market. The sound of its spinning is soft, imperfect, and alive. It's not about the music itself, but about the small crackles between the notes, the breath of the tape, the memory of a time when sound felt like home. There was one night, I think it was late July, maybe 86 or 87, that I go back to more than any other. Not because anything special happened, but because nothing did, and that nothing had a weight to it. The kind that stays in your chest for decades, soft and unspoken. It was one of those thick, slow evenings when the heat didn't break, even after sunset. The kind where shirts stick to your back and everyone talks a little slower, not out of tiredness, but because the air itself seems to stretch every word. I was 15, maybe 16. We'd spent the afternoon riding bikes with squeaky brakes and bent wheels, circling the neighborhood until our legs ached just enough to feel alive. Later, we all ended up in front of the little corner shop with the yellow awning, where the old man behind the counter knew us by name and didn't mind if we loitered as long as we bought something. I remember holding a sweating bottle of orange soda in one hand and a melting popsicle in the other, trying to keep both from dripping onto my shorts. There were 4 of us, me, Dul, Ivan, and Ninad, each of us with our own cassette tape in our pockets, convinced we had found the song that would change everything. No one had a boombox that day, but someone's older brother had left a small monotape player on the porch, and we took turns plugging in our choices. The sound was terrible, tinny, low, half swallowed by the cicadas in the trees, but it didn't matter. We lay on the sidewalk, backs against the warm pavement, watching the streetlights buzz to life one by one. They gave off that flickering orange glow that made everything look like a half-remembered dream. The music played quietly, interrupted occasionally by the tape clicking or someone rewinding too far. I think the song that stayed with me most wasn't even one I liked much. Some synth-heavy love song with echoing drums. But the way it sounded mixed with the night air made it feel important, like it was ours. Around midnight, we walked toward the park not because we had plans, but because we didn't want to go home just yet. The sky was so clear you could see the faint lines of the Milky Way, something I hadn't noticed before and haven't really seen since. There was a moment where none of us spoke, not out of awkwardness, just comfort. The sound of our footsteps on gravel, someone whistling softly, the hum of distant cars, and the chirp of night insects stitched it all together. And I remember thinking, though I wouldn't have known how to say it then, that this, right now, was a kind of forever. That I would carry this exact silence, this exact blend of sounds, for the rest of my life. Not because anything profound was said. We didn't talk about dreams or fears or love. We joked. We threw rocks into bushes. We lay on a bench and watched the moon rise. But underneath it all, there was this quiet recognition that something was passing not in a dramatic way, just slowly, like a train at the edge of your vision, and that we were part of it, that the night had let us in. I don't know where those boys are now. We lost touch, like most people do. Life pulled us in separate directions, jobs, cities, families. But sometimes, when the air is just right, and the evening is heavy with stillness, I hear that night again, in a single chord. A far-off dog barking, the sigh of warm wind through trees, and it brings me back. Not to being young exactly, but to being present. To a moment when time paused, and everything, absolutely everything, felt like it was quietly waiting to be remembered. I was sitting by the window the other night, long after the emails had stopped, and the last dish was rinsed and dried, just letting the apartment rest around me. It was one of those modern evenings that don't really have a center, no ritual to mark the end of the day, no final song or closed book. Just a screen dimmed, a light turned off, and then this strange, new kind of silence. At first glance, it is silent. But when you lean in, really listen, it's filled with a different kind of noise. The low hum of the refrigerator, the faint whir of the router's fan, a distant siren that comes and goes like a passing thought. Somewhere, a TV plays through a thin wall, two people arguing on some show I'll never watch. It's a kind of ambient tension, not loud but persistent. I think what I miss most about the silence from my childhood is that it had space in it. You could feel it. There were pauses between things. The gaps between songs on the radio, when the static held for just a second longer than expected. The moment right after you turned off the lights in the room and your ears adjusted, trying to catch the creak of the building settling or the soft knock of a branch against the window. Silence wasn't absence. It was presence. Now, everything blends. Even the quiet is full. Our homes are rarely still, our minds even less so. The funny thing is, I don't think I realized this shift until I started noticing that my memories of the 80s always came with sound, but not busy sound. Found sound, familiar sound. A slipper dragging across a kitchen tile, a fan turning on with a soft thump, my mother's bangles clinking as she pulled clothes from the line, the gentle flap of a newspaper being folded by my grandfather, sitting by the window with his glasses halfway down his nose. Those were the background sounds of love, really. They weren't meant to be noticed. They were just there, like breath, like pulse. And now, my apartment is modern, clean. Everything works quietly. No rattling pipes, no ticking clocks. My phone tells me the time in silence. My kettle shuts off automatically with a polite click. My windows block the wind too well. It's all efficient. But sometimes I catch myself missing the imprecision of old things. The uneven rhythm of a washing machine that sounded like it was about to fall apart. The tape recorder that wheezed a little before playing, like it had to clear its throat. There was something human in those flaws. Something that said, I'm trying. Maybe that's what I miss. Not just the sounds themselves, but what they meant. The quiet back then wasn't about isolation. It was about closeness. You could hear your house breathing. You could hear people moving. You could fall asleep to the soundtrack of others simply being near. Tonight, my silence feels sharper. It holds less warmth. But I light a small candle and let the flame flicker just enough movement to break the stillness. And for a moment, I swear I hear it again. That slow rhythm of my father stirring sugar into his cup, the screen door creaking shut, the soft buzz of the radio waiting for someone to press play. And I think to myself, not with sadness, but with a kind of quiet gratitude, I remember. And that sometimes is enough. Winters in the 80s sounded different. They felt heavier, but not in a burdened way, more like the air itself was wrapped in wool. When the snow fell, it didn't rush. It drifted, slowly, with purpose. And when it landed, it brought a hush over everything. You could stand outside at dusk, and all you'd hear was the soft crunch beneath your boots and the distant bark of a dog, muffled by the thick air. Even the birds seemed to quiet down. The world, just for a few weeks, moved slower like it was catching its breath. I remember how our hallway smelled like damp coats and warm metal from the radiators. Every jacket rustled when you took it off, that crinkly sound of synthetic fabric and old stuffing, heavy with cold. The zipper would stick, the sleeves would catch on your sweater. And the floor by the door was always wet, from snow melting off boots, lined up in pairs, like tired soldiers. Inside, the windows fogged from the heat, and we'd draw shapes in the condensation. Our fingers tracing hearts or initials we'd later wipe away in embarrassment. The TV was always too quiet at first, especially during holiday movies. We'd turn it up until the volume number blinked in orange digits. Those little speakers made everything sound distant, like the voices came from another room, but we didn't mind. It was enough. There was one sound I loved most, the rustle of wrapping paper days before New Year's. Not the tearing, but the folding. The way my mother would carefully crease the edges, smoothing them down with the side of her thumb, the tape pulled off with that soft thwick and pressed gently down. Even when money was tight, she made everything feel generous, simply by the way she wrapped things. I don't remember the gifts, not really, but I remember the sound of the scissors gliding through paper in the next room while I pretended not to be listening. That was love too. Today, winters feel brighter. And not in a bad way, just different. Storefronts blink with LED lights that change color every few seconds. People wear sleeker coats, shoes that don't squeak. Packages arrive in silence. Even greetings are quicker, typed, sent, read, and forgotten. And yet, sometimes when it's late and the first real snow begins to fall outside my window, I open the pane just slightly to listen, to see if I can catch it, that old hush. The kind of silence that sits on your shoulders like a blanket, not a weight. The kind that wraps the whole street in a breathless pause. And once in a while, I do. I'll hear it in the stillness between two passing cars, or in the way the snow presses against the world like a hand calming a restless child. I'll close my eyes, and in that moment, I'm back in our old apartment, the radiator hissing quietly, the faint clatter of plates being stacked in the kitchen, the sound of my parents' voices behind a closed door, not words, just their rhythm. That's the silence I carry with me, the kind that holds warmth. And every winter, no matter how much changes, I wait for it to return. Not in full, just in fragments, in sound, in memory, in the way the snow still falls slowly when no one's watching. There was always a quiet hour between the time school ended and the time my parents came home. A small window of peace that I didn't realize was precious until much later. I'd let myself in with the copy of The Key tied to my shoelace, drop my backpack by the door, and walk through the apartment in socks, feeling the warmth left behind by the afternoon sun on the parquet floor. The apartment sounded different when it was empty. The refrigerator buzzed a little louder. Pipes creaked with more confidence. And the wind outside, even when barely moving, made the curtain sway just enough to brush against the radiator and make a low whisper, like someone sighing behind fabric. That was my favorite time of day. I didn't have to talk, didn't have to explain how school went, or why I forgot to turn in my homework again. I was just there, in the soft stillness, with the freedom to be no one in particular for a while. I'd usually go straight to my room, where the radio sat on the shelf next to my taped-up pencil case and a half-used notebook full of band logos I'd copied from magazines. The radio wasn't anything special, plastic, white, with a dial that didn't line up with the stations quite right, but it worked. I'd turn it on, not too loud, and sit beside the window, watching the street below. There was something beautiful about hearing a song you liked by accident, the randomness of it, the feeling that the world had chosen that exact moment to say, "Here, this one's for you." And sometimes, in between songs, there was that soft, static hiss of breath before the DJ spoke again. That pause meant something. It gave you time to feel. I'd lie on my bed, one leg dangling off the side, and stare at the ceiling. Sometimes I'd think about what I wanted to be when I grew up. Sometimes I'd think about her, the girl 2 grades above me, with the braid and the denim jacket covered in pins. But mostly, I just was. No goals, no deadlines. Just the sound of a song ending and the sun slipping slowly across the wall. I found an old tape a few months ago, buried in a box of cables and adapters. It had no label, just A written on one side in faded marker. I found a dusty cassette player at a second-hand shop and sat in my kitchen one Sunday afternoon and pressed play. The sound was warped, grainy, But then, halfway through the tape, it came. A song I hadn't heard in decades. The same song I used to play while sitting in my old room, waiting for nothing in particular. And suddenly, I was there again, in that golden hour of childhood, in that silence that was full, not empty. I closed my eyes and let it play all the way through, didn't skip, didn't fast forward, because I remembered something I'd forgotten to remember, that some of the most important parts of growing up don't come from moments we talk about. They live in the in-between, in the spaces between the bell and the front door, in the light between afternoon and evening, in the songs that filled the quiet when no one was watching. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they come back, just for a while, just long enough to remind you, you've been here before, and you were okay. My father was not a loud man. He never raised his voice unless the faucet was leaking again or the soccer game on TV got too close for comfort. He wasn't distant, just quiet, in a way that made you pay attention to the few things he did say, but more than words. What I remember about him now are sounds, little, familiar sounds that stitched his presence into the house long after he left the room. The way his keys jingled in his coat pocket every time he walked through the door. The soft slap of his slippers as he moved from the hallway to the kitchen. The click of his lighter as he sat down in his chair by the window with the newspaper folded perfectly in half, already turned to the second page. I used to sit nearby, pretending to do homework, just listening. He'd clear his throat every now and then, shift in the chair, sip his tea with that gentle ah sound after the first sip, as if the whole day made sense again. He rarely looked up, but his presence was calming, like a radio station you didn't realize had been playing in the background until it suddenly stopped. I remember one evening in particular. The power had gone out, probably a blown fuse, maybe a neighborhood blackout, I can't remember. But it was quiet, truly quiet. No TV, no hum of the fridge, just us sitting in the living room with a single candle between us. I must have been around 10. He handed me the radio, an old battery-powered one with a cracked dial, and told me to try to find something. I turned the knob slowly, listening to the hiss between stations. There was something comforting in that static, like the world was still out there, even if we couldn't see it. Eventually, a song came through, fuzzy, warbled, but enough. He leaned back, crossed his arms behind his head, and said, almost to himself, "This is better anyway." That moment stayed. Not the song, not the darkness, but the stillness between us. The ease. These days, I think of him most when I hear certain sounds. An old chair creaking under weight, a match being struck, the distant buzz of AM radio late at night. Sometimes, even my own footsteps echo back at me in just the right way, and for half a second, I forget I'm the one making them. I still have his watch. It doesn't work anymore, but I keep it in the drawer next to my bed. Sometimes, late at night, I'll pick it up, wind it gently, knowing full well it won't start ticking, and hold it to my ear. There's no sound, but still it brings me peace. Because sound isn't always about hearing. Sometimes it's about remembering what something used to sound like. The pause before his voice, the weight of his silence, the way he was always there, in the room even when he didn't say a word. I wonder now if that's a kind of love I never understood back then. A love that didn't announce itself, just lived in the room beside you and stayed long after. I don't live in a noisy building, but it never feels truly quiet. The walls hum with modern life plumbing, elevators, neighbors' washing machines. There's always something running, always something ticking. But now and then, if I get up in the middle of the night, barefoot, and walk to the kitchen without turning on the light, I catch it. That old silence, or something like it. A shadow of a sound that used to fill the air when everything was still analog, when nothing blinked or buzzed unless someone told it to. And I stand there in my small kitchen, hand resting on the counter, eyes closed, listening, just listening. I think we spend a lot of our lives trying to make sense of noise. The things people say, the rush of it all. But in the end, it's the quiet that teaches you the most. The quiet of a winter morning, before anyone's awake. The quiet between two lines of a song. The quiet when someone you love is in the room and doesn't need to speak. Those are the moments that stay. I don't remember the birthdays. Not really. Not the parties, or the school assemblies, or the loud dinners. But I remember the sound of my mother folding laundry late at night. I remember the way my friend's bike chain clicked as we coasted downhill without pedaling. I remember the wind through the cracked window above the stairwell at school, whistling like it had something to say, but never said it. I keep those sounds with me, even now, not in recordings, not in playlists, just in the rhythm of how I move through the day. I've found myself doing the same things my father used to do, tapping a spoon against a cup a certain way, clearing my throat before I speak, letting the radio play just a little too softly. And I think maybe that's how we carry things forward, not by retelling stories, but by repeating the pauses, by holding the silence a little longer. I don't try to recreate the 80s. That time is gone. The radios are smaller now, the buttons too quiet. The cities never sleep the way they used to. But sometimes I light a candle, make a cup of tea, and sit without checking the time. And I listen to what's left, to what I still carry. And somewhere, far beneath the buzz of everything else, I hear them. The soft footsteps on linoleum, the rustle of plastic wrapping paper, the click of a tape being turned over, the stillness before a song begins. And I realize nothing ever really leaves, not if you've truly heard it. It stays with you, tucked deep inside, waiting for a moment like this one to rise again gently and say, "You were there, you felt it, you remember," and that's enough.